Welcome to another episode of We Don't Die. I'm your host, Sandra Champlain, author of the international best-selling book called We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death. And just a reminder, my home base is wedon'tdie.com, where you can always find great things. Like we offer a free Sunday gathering, inspirational service every Sunday with medium demonstration included. We host classes, demonstrations. You can find past episodes and so much more. If you're a super fan of my work and you love investigating the afterlife, between this show and my other show, Shades of the Afterlife, I now have over 700 episodes. I know, hard to believe. If you'd like to join my Patreon community for any donation, you get all episodes of We Don't Die, commercial free and before the public. Plus, you can search all past 700 episodes to find those topics that matter most to you. Today, I'm so pleased we are welcoming back my dear friend Simon Bown, who we first heard on episode 377. He's a wonderful, wonderful man, and he's got some really big news today. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and give it away because his brand new book, Verified Near-Death Experiences, Proof of an Afterlife, has just been released, which explores 30 verified near-death experience cases where experiencers brought back detailed, irrefutable knowledge that they could not have known through any normal means. I love this topic. Simon is also the host of two influential podcasts, now over 800 episodes himself, engaging in conversations related to consciousness, the afterlife. He's also a clinical hypnotherapist and certified in past life regression therapy. There's a lot more to him, but we'll hear in his own words. You can find out more about Simon, his book, everything he's up to at pastliveshypnosis.co.uk. Simon, my friend, welcome back to We Don't Die.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Great to talk to you again.
I couldn't be any happier. And your topic of this book has to be, between this and deathbed visitations, my two hot topics that I just love to hear more about. So if you wouldn't mind starting off, just a little refresher course in who you are. I know people can go back to episode 377, but just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then what had you go after these wonderful cases of vertical near-death experiences?
Yeah, it goes back to like I was 10 years old and I was fascinated by all sorts of supernatural things. Like 10 years old, I'd read books on Bigfoot and UFOs and ghosts. And as I got older, I kind of got more into two different streams of interest, which was the afterlife and UFOs. And I was reading books like in the 80s, I would read Shirley MacLaine's books, or I would read Raymond Moody's books and all sorts of things. And I was having my own experiences. I used to go to the College of Psychic Studies in London in the 1980s, and not as a student, but they had people who were students there learning mediumship and channeling, psychic stuff, past life regression. And so I'd go every couple of weeks and pay a little bit of money, and the students there could practice on you. And that's where I was taken through a past life regression, my first one, about 1987. And so over time, I went through other past life regressions, and I got to a point where I thought I wanted to do this myself for people. So I got a diploma in clinical hypnotherapy and then the certification in past life regression therapy. So I've been taking people through these kind of sessions, done hundreds of them now. But I've also had my own experiences, the one with the feathers showing up really unexpectedly. I saw UFOs a couple of times. I've had psychic flashes. And I thought I'd try it out myself, making a podcast. And as I'm a musician, I had loads of recording software at home. I knew how to record a band, and recording yourself just talking is a piece of cake. So I was very lucky. And right from the beginning, I'd email people and say, will you be a guest on my podcast? And they said, yes. And here we are 800 episodes later, and I'm still fascinated and excited to do it. And there's so much more to learn. Kind of sum it up as that I've read a lot, I've had a lot of experiences, I've talked to a lot of people, done a lot of podcasts. One of the things I'm most interested in when I'm doing my podcast is the near-death experiences where there's some kind of verified information, where you would have somebody who is dead effectively, maybe on the operating table, and they can see that their heart has stopped, their brain is flatlined, but they can come back after resuscitation and describe things that happened while they were dead. And people say, yes, that did happen, but you couldn't have seen it. And they say, no, I was up there at the ceiling looking down on it. And basically, that's what my book's all about, is those verification events. But it goes further than that, because some of the events they see are nowhere near their body. They could be in another part of the hospital, or they could be miles away from wherever they are. And I think for materialists or skeptics, it's very hard to argue or come up with some reason how they could know that thing that happened while they were dead and it happened 7 kilometers away.
We're in a very exciting time, and I think you know this, that there's a lot coming out with science and medicine about consciousness and consciousness surviving physical death. And I love these stories because we've heard near death experiences and they're wonderful. Lots of commonalities, seeing the light, seeing the loved ones, tunnel, life review, those kind of things. And they're lovely. They truly are. But there's something about the evidence that there's no possible way people can know any other way, like blind people who can see for the first time, or things like you say, you see something happening so far away. There was a study not too long ago, I think it was earlier, the beginning of this year, that came out with that one organization said, okay, near death experiences are definitely not a byproduct of our brain shutting down. That was a common theory, but there's so much that people witness outside that it cannot be that. So, would you mind sharing some of these stories just to give us an idea what we're talking about here? Because, as you know, most of my listeners and viewers were people that have a loved one who's passed and really want to know that they have gone on. So, would you be open to a little story time with Simon?
Yeah. There's one in the book that is from 1911. And this was about a boy who's 16 years old. He's walking down the street in London and a wall collapsed. And that's what killed him effectively. And he found himself hovering over the body, looking down on it. And he was worried about his mum. He was 16 years old. And then in an instant, he was with her at this house. And he was living in London and his parents were living somewhere else. And he was in this room with them. She's doing some knitting and dad's reading the newspaper. And she suddenly says, something's happened to my boy. And the father's, oh, no, don't be ridiculous. And she says, no, we've got to go to London. And so the father's kind of huffing and puffing. He's like, okay, we'll get the train to London. And so the 16-year-old is in spirit form, like his soul is watching all of this. And then he goes with them onto the train and he's part of the train journey and he knows the whole conversation that happened. And so they get to London. He's been transported to his own place where he lives. We didn't have the National Health Service in those days. And he was, back. And he said to his mum and dad, I saw you in the house. I saw you were knitting. Dad, you were reading a paper. Mum said this thing. And he described the whole conversation on the train. But they knew he wasn't with them. He was in London, maybe in the street or in his bed. And he couldn't possibly have known those conversations and what happened. And so that's the great verification. And one of the things about that 1911 is his description of what happened is pretty much exactly how people describe near-death experiences now. A sort of criticism I've heard that some skeptics may say, oh, people recount a near-death experience because they've heard about it in the media or something, and they think that's how it's supposed to go. That's nonsense. So I really like that one because it is such a long time ago. And I found that in my research. And at the time, they called it astral travel. Tibor Puknoki, he was a Hungarian man. In the early 90s, he went into the hospital and he had very, very high blood pressure. And the doctors were very worried about him. And so one day he starts having this pain in his chest. And then suddenly he finds himself standing in the ward with all these beds around him. And he felt fantastic. And he thought, this is great. I'm cured. And these nurses are running past him and a doctor. And they're crowded around this bed. And he's looking back thinking, that must be a real VIP patient to get so much attention. And on the side of the ward, there's a room where the nurses prepare all sorts of things. and it has a two-way mirror. So the nurses can see in the ward, but you can't see in from the ward. So that's one thing. He couldn't see what is going on in that room if he wanted to. And he thought about that room. And then again, in an instant, he's inside that room. There's a nurse with a trolley at a cabinet, and she's getting all these bits and pieces out and putting them onto a trolley. And she dropped one and it went under the cabinet. And Tybor wonders, what is that thing? And suddenly, in an instant, he's like 4 inches away from this object that's underneath the cabinet. And he read the label of what it is and the serial number. And then suddenly he sprung back out again. And there's a nurse on the phone. And she's talking to her husband, who's at home in their apartment, about finding the doctor's number because their children are ill. You know, it's the early 90s. They've got their own paper phone book. They write the numbers down in. And she's saying, no, it's in there. You just got to look at it. It's written in red. And he's getting frustrated. And Tybal's listening to this whole conversation. And you think, then again, he's teleported and he's in the apartment with the guy who's on the phone. And so Tybor can see everything there, the furniture, the books on the shelves. He said the carpet was really nice and deep. And the man's wearing these socks with these little animal pictures on them. And Tybor said, he said to himself, what kind of a man wears socks like these? You know, all sorts of things happen to Tybor. As I explain it in my book, after that, he goes to this place where he has a life review and those kind of spiritual things happen. And then he's back in the hospital and he realizes it's him in the bed that they're trying to resuscitate. And this nurse comes rushing past with a trolley and he tries to stop her. He's like, no, leave me alone. I'm fine. Don't resuscitate me. Obviously, he comes back to life. And when he's stabilized, the doctor comes to him. He says, so you were dead for 9 minutes. What happened? And so Tybor starts explaining it all. And the doctor, he goes into the nurse's room, looks under the cabinet, and there's that thing exactly as Tybor described it. He even got the serial number correct on the box. And they found the nurse that was on the phone, and she confirms the phone call, what the content of the phone call was. And the doctor says, do you know this man? Has he ever been to your apartment? And she's like, no, he's never been there. So the nurse takes the doctor to the apartment and he sees it's exactly as Tybor described it. And when he returns to the hospital, he's holding those socks in his hand. The content of the phone call, what the apartment looks like, the man's socks. Also, the nurse could confirm that the time of the phone call was also the time that CPR was happening on Tybor because he was dead. They were trying to resuscitate him. So they could sort of look at the timings and how they match up there. I really like that case because there's all these different levels to it. It's not just one verification event.
How does one, Simon, begin to investigate all of these? There are so many near-death experiences, and I know just for me in interviews and my adventures looking for these, it's very hard to find the verifiable ones. It must have taken a lot of work to investigate these.
A lot of the people in the book have been guests on my podcast. And so I was able to interview them and quiz them about their whole experience. And I find a lot of near-death experiences have these verification events, but don't really talk about them. It's almost like they've come back with a mission that's about spirituality and unconditional love. They're kind of bringing that message back, saying, you know, we shouldn't be so judgmental and we should have more empathy. It's almost like towards the end of the interview, I could say, do you have anything that was verified? They go, oh, yeah, sure. And then they start talking about it. I think 24 of the people in my book were guests on my podcast. And so I was able to quiz them about these verifications. And then I did further Zoom calls with them to go over it again. And before my book was published, I sent them each chapter that they're featured in. And they were able to go through them and then email me back and say if there was anything that was a little inaccurate or how good the chapter was. So it's not just a thing where I kind of did research and read books. I actually talked to these people and they confirmed that what I've put in the book is accurate. So that was one of the ways that I found these people. And I've talked to so many people on my podcast, you know what it's like. And then there was some famous cases that I really like Pamela Reynolds. And there's the Maria's shoe case with the shoe on the hospital roof. There's one from Raymond Moody in there about a boy who talks about how the room where he was born had pink walls. And the parents didn't believe him. And eventually they rang the hospital that confirmed the walls in that room were pink. They'd run out of all the other paint colors. That's all they had left. So they had to paint the room pink. And there's a book that's called something like The Phenomena of Astral Projection. And that was published in 1951. And that has loads of little cases in it. That's where I got this 1911 case from. And then there's a guy, Mr. Ogston, who was in the British Army in the Victorian period. And he was in the battle and he got injured in France and died. And he went home and saw his wife in England. And he thought it was a dream. But when he talked to her, she confirmed that what he'd seen had happened. So, you kind of pick up all these different things. And there's a case in there from the Journal of the International Association of Near-Death Studies. There's a great case there that I picked up, and Jan Holden, who runs that, gave me permission to put it in my book. So, it's the thing, you've got to start trying to find things from different places as well as the people you talk to.
Absolutely. What are some of the common threads of these near-death experiences?
But with verifications, there's the one where they'll see something happen and that can be confirmed. But a lot of them talk about they might go somewhere away from the hospital, or they might go to another part of the hospital where their family is and their friends. There's one lady who was suddenly in the car with her sister as her sister was driving to the hospital, and she could hear her sister's thoughts. And she said how her sister's not at all religious, but in her mind she was praying for her. And that's another kind of thing that they talk about, is that they can hear the thoughts of their family and their friends. And there was another guy, his mum was on the phone to his uncle, and his uncle was driving his family to California for a vacation. And he could hear their thoughts as well as their conversation. And about how in the car, the uncle said to his children, "We've got to turn around, go back to the hospital. We can't go to California." And how the children were like, "Oh, no, no, let's go to California. We don't want to go to the hospital." He could confirm all that was correct. And that they confirmed that what they were thinking was correct. It wasn't just what he heard. And then there's other things where people do things which are verified. And, the other commonalities is with the life review that are in a lot of the chapters, because each chapter features a different person and it goes through their whole near-death experience. It's not just verification events. And the life reviews come up in all sorts of different ways, but it has the same effect on them. There's one guy, it's like it's a bubble all around him, all these things going on. And then somebody else saw it like on a table, and it was a hologram on a table. And somebody else said they had this big box and they looked inside it and all these things were happening in there. But it's still the same emotional impact of the feeling you get of when you're mean to somebody and you feel what that's like to be mean, and how that is a ripple effect where that person that you've been mean to might feel bad and then they might be mean to someone else. And you feel that all of that. I think that's one of the most powerful things with a near-death experience. That's why it changes people so much. There was one thing that showed up, I think it's 3 people in my book talk about being in this incredible kind of heavenly landscape. And they're with a spirit guide or a spiritual being, and they're taken to this enormous white building that's just incredibly grand and huge and beautiful. And it's like a library, a place of knowledge where all these spirits go to study. And it's almost like those people, those souls, their heaven is going to university, is studying something. And they're taken to this place. And one of the people said they saw people coming and going in all sorts of like period costumes. Some were dressed as Romans, some medieval, some modern times. And you get to the building, one of them said, and it's just a wall, and then a door will open up in the wall, and you'll get through into the room that's exactly the one you need. And the spirit guide said something like, the building matches your frequency with the room's frequency to know where you're going to go. And one of the people was taken into this building for their life review, but they describe it as being so big, you can't see the other end of the building when you're inside it. And it's floor to ceiling shelves full of books and scrolls and things. And it kind of makes me think of the Akashic records or something like that. So yeah, that's another one of the commonalities. I did find some where people were in their near-death experience, and you hear so much about it's all love and light and wonderful. But there's one of them says to me she was in this light space towards the end of her near-death experience. It's just white. You people talk about the black void. This is almost like a white void. And somebody came in and said, "What are you doing here?" And she's like, I don't know." Because "Joe, you shouldn't be here. You shouldn't go back." He goes, "I don't know what I'm doing." And this woman's saying, "Well, don't be ridiculous. Of course you know what you're doing." And she had to convince her that, she's not in control of her near-death experience like this. There was another guy called Randy Schaefer. He went into this city, this incredible city with these buildings that are like nothing you see on earth. It's so amazing. And there was this stairway just going up into the clouds. And he started climbing it. And this happened to him twice. And he heard this voice suddenly say, "Look, there's Randy, get him." And he felt a tug on his thing. And then he was out, and he was in a coma. So he had 4 different kind of periods of near-death experience, and the next time he was there, he was climbing up the stairs again, he heard this voice, "Get him," and he looked round, and there was this guy in this white robe with a white sash, long white beard and long white hair. He was the guy, for some reason, grabbing him and pulling him back. But, there's a great verification with Brandy, and that's a really good story. So there's some, commonalities that come up.
I love it. And you also have it as an audiobook, correct?
Yeah, yeah. Being a podcaster, I thought I had no excuse, so I can record it.
It sounds fascinating when we cross over that there is going to be the most incredible adventure, but certainly something pulled these people back. Is there a sense of the value of being here on Earth versus the other side?
There's always that thing where people say it's so amazing to be in that space that they don't really want to come back. And you hear from people, they've got small children on Earth and their husband's there, and they might think, if I don't go back, there's no way my husband's going to manage. But they're still like, no, I don't want to go back. I'm going to stay here. And it's like the spirit guides or whoever have to force them to go back or really talk them into it. Then there's other people who will say, no, I do have to go back. I don't want to really, but I've got to look after my children, or I've got to do this, I've got to do that. So people do come back also feeling like they've come back with a mission. They've got a job to do about communicating this space that they went to and that there is life after death. From a reincarnation point of view, you come here to learn lessons. That's why you incarnate. So there's value to it from that side of things. But with near-death experiences, I suppose there's a few distressing ones where people definitely don't want to be in the near-death experience and they want to get out of there. Like with Howard Storm, he was in a really nasty place and he started saying a prayer and he was lifted out of that into the light and came back, and he was an atheist, and now after that he's become a pastor. So yeah, the value of coming back is a hard one to answer really, because it seems to me that if I was on the other side in that amazing space, I wouldn't want to come back either. I've got my children. I probably would come back and then talk about it on my podcast, and no one would believe me because that's what my podcast's all about.
That's funny. I'm not in any hurry to get there, nor do I wish to have a near death experience. I don't, but I love hearing these stories because it gives us hope and belief. And I personally think that if the afterlife is good all of the time, we can create wonderful things, visit the halls of learning or wherever that may be, that there's value for living with our 5 senses that we have here now. And we learn from negative things, and what people learn so much with their near death experiences is they want to come back and they want to be of service. So if we can start that ball rolling, even have a life review before we go to sleep at night, right? We can prevent having maybe that in such a deep way when we get there.
Yeah, that full lifelong life review. If you do it every day here, then it would only be little snippets. It wouldn't be so bad.
Would you share the stories of Pam Reynolds and also the one with the shoe? That's a Maria, right?
Yeah, that's the short one in my book. That one's quite well known. It's Maria was in hospital and she passed away. When she came back, she talked about a tennis shoe on the roof of the hospital. She talked about the scuff marks on it, the angle it was sitting. And a nurse called Kimberly Clark went up to the roof and found that tennis shoe. She could tell that you cannot see it from being on the ground. You cannot see it from any hospital windows. So, how on earth did Maria know about this shoe and describe it so accurately? That's a great case. And was you asking about Randy Schiefer and the things that happened with him?
Yeah, and
He
you
was
mentioned Pam Reynolds too.
Oh, yeah, Pam Reynolds, she had an aneurysm at the base of her brain down at the back here at the bottom, and she saw one neurosurgeon who says, "There's nothing we can do. You should prepare yourself. You've only got a few months." And she sought out a second opinion. This was the early 90s, and she found Dr. Robert Spetzler, this neurosurgeon. He had a new technique that he developed, which is to do a kind of hypothermic freezing of the body before you do the operation. So what they would do is make the body really, really cold, and they would stop your heart and your head would flatline, your brain. And they do all that on purpose. And then it would be much safer to operate on the aneurysm and remove it. And they were pumping, like they put her on a bypass machine and they were taking her blood and putting it back in so it's much colder. She went in and they put her under general anesthetic. Now, one of the things is that in that operation, I think in most as well, is they close your eyes and they tape them closed. So she couldn't have seen anything if she was still conscious. Another thing is they put these specially molded earplugs in. And this is the early 90s. They're not like earbuds like we have today. They were made specifically for her ears. And they played these really rapid clicking noises into these things at 96 decibels, which is almost like standing next to a speeding train. It's so loud. And it was very rapid. It's maybe 15, 20 clicks per second. There's no way she could hear anything while those are in her ears. So she found herself hovering over the operation, watching what's happening. And they got out this special saw to cut into her skull, and they were using that. And then she went on to go to another space and had a spiritual meeting with her family. And they gave her some healing while she was in that space. And then she came back and they were carrying on with the operation. They're having a conversation and there's some music playing in the background, which she thought, I didn't know they did that in operating theatres, just have the radio on while they're doing this stuff. Her uncle's with her deceased uncle looking down at the body, and she's thinking, I don't want to go back. My body's in a terrible state. Why would anybody want to return to this? And he said, no, don't worry about it. It's just like jumping into a swimming pool. And she's like, no, I don't want to go back. And he says, it was like he pushed her. She felt this definite shove. And it was like jumping into a swimming pool. Her body was so cold. When she was resuscitated and, she's back to stability, she was able to tell them, I heard you listening. You were listening to Hotel California by the Eagles. And I felt a little annoyed because there was the line, you can check out, but you can never leave. She's told them what they were talking about. There was a point where they needed to get a really nice vein or artery as to something they would patch in here. And they took it from her leg. And the nurse that was going to get it said to the doctor, they're too small, it's not going to work. And he said, try the other leg. That was accurate. And they know that her brain was flatlined when these things were going on. And she accurately described the bone saw, which she described as looking like an electric toothbrush. And that's exactly what it is. It's like got a thing sticking out the top with a circular saw, and you press the button and it spins. And that's how they would cut into the bone. And she described the case it was in and all the attachments. And she said it like a socket set, like you'd have for your car. And the thing is, when she was taken into the operating theatre, all that stuff was covered with a cloth to keep it sterile. So she couldn't have seen it. Also, as I said, she had the specially molded earplugs in. So she couldn't have heard the music. She couldn't have heard the conversation. She couldn't have seen anything, even if she was awake. So I think that's a really great case because there's so many things that happened while they can be sure she was dead because basically they killed her. And I've heard that there's a researcher who's really great for this stuff. Sam Parnier, I think it is. They took her through in the early 90s of freezing the person and shutting them down, like they call it standstill. That's more of a common technique now. And I think Sam Paneer wants to go where those operations are happening and to set up something to see if the near-death experiencer will see something in the room while they can be sure that their body is dead. And I think it's called the Aware Study 3 that he's trying to get together. You've got to go through those ethics boards and things and get permissions.
Incredible. You'd mentioned the name Randy. Is that another story?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great one.
We love stories here, and we're never gonna remember them, so everybody's gonna get your book, Verified Near-Death
Okay.
Experiences.
So, Randy, this was at the beginning of COVID, and he felt very ill, and he went to the doctor and asked for a COVID test, and the doctor said, "No, we don't have it in this area. You've probably just got the flu." And he went home and he got worse and worse. Saw the doctor again, and again the doctor refused the COVID test. And then his daughter came to see him and saw how bad he was and called her sister, who was a nurse. And the nurse said, "Get him to hospital now." And they did an X-ray on his lungs, and they had what they called the typical glass opacities of COVID. And then the COVID test came back positive, and it deteriorated really fast. And this family were told he had a 3% chance of recovering. And that's when he went into a coma. They took him into the coma. It wasn't natural. That's when he had these 4 different instances of near-death experiences. And the first one, he found himself in this amazing hall, and he's up on a kind of mezzanine level looking down at this hall, and this man standing next to him and saying, "This is my favorite room." And Randy's like, "Why that?" He says, "This is called the welcoming room." And then he turned to Randy and said, "But you're not supposed to be here. You have to leave." And so that's when Randy left that amazing building and was in that incredible city where he went up the stairway. And that happened twice, and he was in that city, and there was an incident where he found himself on this dirt pathway, and there was this little boy there, maybe 10 years old, just wearing shorts and jumping around, and it's out in the woods, so there's like just trees around them and these incredible plants, and the boy's like, come with me, come with me." And he takes him to this big house, and they go inside, and there's this big window looking out over a river, and there's all these people swimming and sitting on the bank talking, and the little boy says, "I'll be back in a minute." And so Randy's sitting there, he said, on this red velvet chair looking out this window. Everything's so nice. And then the boy comes back and says, "Your room's not ready. You've got to go back." And Randy goes, "But I want to stay here." And the little boy's, "I'm sorry, your room's not ready." And he's kind of sent into this space where he's coming back. And suddenly this face appears, and it's this man with a moustache. And he's saying, "Tell Madison at the salon I'm okay. Tell Madison at the salon I'm okay." And then he got this picture of this man on this white porch outside the house with all these red, white, and blue ribbons and flags. The word veteran kept repeating in his head. Came back, and he had this miraculous recovery where over the Easter weekend, from Easter Friday till Monday, he came almost back, and could get him out the coma, take him off the intubation and the ventilator and all the drugs. It's one of these things we hear, isn't it? Miraculous recoveries. So he's at home a few months later, and the COVID lockdown's starting to go. People are allowed out, and he wants a haircut. And he finds this business card and gives it to his daughter and says, "Will you book me a haircut?" And his daughter looks at it and goes, "Dad, this is Madison at the salon. It says Madison on the card." So they book the haircut, and he's sitting there with Madison, and he starts telling her about his experience, and she starts crying. And from his description, she said, "That was my grandfather. He died a year ago, and his name was John." So Randy's saying, "I saw a white porch with these flags and the word veteran." And she's saying, "Yeah, he's a veteran. He was part of the association. And every year he'd help out with the flags. And he used to love sitting on that white porch." It's like Madison's crying and Randy's crying. She gives him her grandmother's number. And Randy asks Madison, "Were they round here? Could I have seen him in the street?" And that's kind of where it came from. But she said, no, they lived 1,000 miles away. So he called Kathy, who was Madison's grandmother, and talked to her about this guy, John. And she sent him a photograph, and there he is. That's exactly him. And they became friends. And it ended up Randy went to the house and sat on that porch where John would sit, the white porch, exactly as he'd seen it in the near-death experience. So Kathy says to Randy, this isn't the first time John's tried to make contact. She said, after John died, I was trying to find out if he had life insurance, and I found a business card, and it was for an insurance guy. So I thought, I'll try this and see what they say. And she rung it, and the guy at the other end says, no, I'm not in insurance. He goes, what number did you call? And she reads it out, and he says, oh, you got the area code wrong. I'm in California. And he says, who are you? And she says, well, I'm Kathy in Idaho. And he goes, you're Kathy in Idaho? I had a crash on my motorbike like 2 weeks ago. It was nasty. And there was this point I was floating and looking down on my body. And I heard this voice shouting over and over, tell Kathy in Idaho I'm okay. Tell Kathy in Idaho I'm okay. When the ambulance showed up, he asked who else was with him. And they said, no, there's nobody else here. Because he crashed out on a country road. It wasn't in town. There were no buildings around or anything. And so she'd had that contact from him. And I'm thinking about the chain of events there. Is that she dialed a wrong number to get to this guy. How did that happen? And also, if John was at that accident 2 weeks before the phone call, John must have known that Kathy would call him, misdial a call to him 2 weeks later. John must have known the future. Or maybe it was a thing where she didn't misdial, but John messed with the electronics and made sure the call got through to that guy. So I like that one, that type of verification, two different things happening in there. So that's one of my favorite stories.
And how do these business cards show up as well? Just
Yeah.
who knows? It filled me with goosebumps hearing that story just
Yeah.
now. And Kathy in Idaho. There's such an intelligence from the other side. But living as a human being, we have all these fears and worries and what ifs, and we feel so alone. But we aren't, are we?
No, and that's something when I take people through a past life regression, towards the end of it, we go into the life between lives. And that's where we would hope to encounter their spirit guide. Most of the time they show up, sometimes they don't. But one of the things I ask them at the end, when we ask the spirit guides all sorts of questions about their past lives and their current life, and I asked towards the end of that, is there anything else you feel this person needs to know? And the spirit guides almost always say, we're always with you. We're always on your side. All you need to do is ask for help. They won't help unless you ask for it. 'Cause, it's something to do with free will. So you're right there. I get that from the spirit guides often. And it's interesting that I do hundreds of sessions. All the people in the session don't know each other, but it's this consistent feedback that I get every time, because the person is hypnotized and they're in their minds, they're in that space with their spirit guide. And I ask the question and the spirit guide tells them the answer, then they relay it back to me. It's not like I'm a medium or psychic or something. The client's experiencing this all themselves.
Just goes to show there's so much more to us than meets the eye. What's the value for someone's life currently if they have a past life regression that you found as a regression therapist?
It can be really insightful and it can be healing in some ways if that's what we're trying to do. I'd say 60 or 70% of the people I work with are looking for some therapy, and other people come to me, they just want to see what shows up. It's just an exploration. And we see lives that are so unexpected and unpredictable, but then they make perfect sense in the way they relate to the current life. And people might have something happening in their current life and they see something in their past life and it's suddenly like, hang on, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I can see how these lives are connected and how I'm experiencing this thing here. There's also the therapy side of it where, well, towards the beginning of the session, we ask the spirit guides to join us. And I'll say, please take us to the past life that is the origin point of the current life issue. And so it might be taken specifically to an event and see something happening. I had a guy who had terrible pain in his stomach, and he'd seen the doctors and they'd done all the tests. They could find no reason why he would be in pain. And I took him to a past life and he was stabbed in his stomach. We saw that past life, and I do this thing, it's like an energy release, the kind of negative energy. And then we went to another past life where he did something he felt terribly guilty. And he said that that manifested in his stomach, this feeling. So after the session, a few weeks later, he emailed me and said that pain in his stomach's decreased by about 50%. He sits in front of the TV poking himself in the belly because he can't believe how much the pain has decreased. And there's a woman who had eczema on her leg. She didn't come to me for anything to do with that, but we saw a past life where she was a hunter in a forest and she stepped in a bear trap and those big metal claws came up and grabbed her leg. And it's exactly the same place in this life where the eczema is. And she was in her 50s and she tried everything to get rid of it. And she emailed me later and said the eczema's completely gone. And there was something happening there. And I don't quite know what it is. Techniques for breaking the bond with the past life or releasing energy. Or we can also ask the spirit guide for healing. But it seems to work. It seems to be amazing. It's like everybody processes it in a different way because we're all unique. And so for some people, it's really powerful. And other people, it's just a little bit. And, you know, I don't want to say on here, I can heal you because it's just something that might be the way the spirit guides want it to work, or just the way you process it yourself, or something to do with energy. And I just try and do my best with the techniques that I've got.
Just another verification that we live in a very intelligent universe. I know healing is possible. There's been so many studies of different types of healing, even placebo effect and things, and how powerful our minds are. And just to tie in whatever works, you do your part, but I do think it's a journey of self healing. And I don't doubt that from beyond there's healing as well. Do we need to be open to have a session for this? I would think people that come to you have a little curiosities, maybe a little skepticism, but they have to be open to just at least try it.
Yeah, yeah, you need to engage with the process. There are some people who've done it before. Other people will meditate and something will spring up during their meditation that makes them interested. I get the impression a lot of times it's almost like the person's been guided to do a past life regression, like their spirit guides are nudging them because they want to show them something. But if we go through the hypnotic induction and, the person will have to follow it, and it's me guiding them through relaxation and visualization. And it's also a thing where you've just got to accept what comes to you because it comes up in your imagination. You can feel like you're making it up, but then the lives can be so healing and so unexpected. And I record the whole session and send it to the client so I can say, look, don't try and do any analysis now. Don't get logical. Just go with the flow. You can listen to the recording later and then you can do the analysis. And I think that's what you've got to do. Just accept it. And almost, I suppose some people might have to see it as entertainment and not think it's real and just see how entertaining it is. And then I see them in tears on the Zoom call. And it's like, after we finish, I go out to my wife and she'll say, how'd it go? And I say, I made them cry. And she said, yeah, excellent. Well done.
Nothing wrong with tears. They're very healing. How long is a session?
It's an hour.
Well, that's not bad at all, is it? And
Yeah.
lots can be released. Oh my goodness. Simon, what is it that gives you the greatest passion? Is it continuing to study all of this? I know for myself, I can get caught up in just thinking I'm a person and locked into fears and worries, but no sooner I interview somebody for a podcast or read a book or listen to a podcast episode that's like, ah, yes, there is a bigger picture. Does this help you in your humanly journey being the best you can be?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. It's that thing of hearing so many life reviews and hearing how if you're mean to somebody, it can have such an effect. And also if you're nice to someone. And some people in the life reviews say they see such trivial little things where they might have been a little nice to someone. And the spirit guides are so proud of that incident. And you might think to yourself, yeah, but that's nothing. That's just a little thing. But it really means something. So it kind of makes you think about how you behave yourself and how you treat people. Like nobody's perfect. And maybe sometimes you'll do something, oh man, that's coming back in my life review. I shouldn't have done that. But yeah, that is a definite thing. And also, when you're growing up, you have a fear of death if you don't know about all this stuff. And so that can be really hard. I've had emails from people who say that for them it's such an impact on their life, and they lie awake at night thinking of death and thinking it's just the end and there's nothing. And by hearing this information, it really helps them. And I've heard from people who are grieving who said that they found these podcasts, not just mine, but yours as well. And they found this information is amazing. And they might be going to a group, say, for grieving parents. And if they bring up something spiritual, the guy in charge will say, no, no, we don't talk about that sort of thing here. And really, that can be very helpful. Maybe that's what they should talk about as well as everything else they do.
I agree. I always do a shout out to our friends at helpingparentsheal.org. They have over 20,000 members. They call them shining light parents whose kids are in the afterlife now. And it is a grief organization that also embraces the reality of the afterlife. So I love that. Simon, you've mentioned a couple times I've heard spirit guides. Spirit guides are spirit guides.
Mhm.
Can we work with them on a daily basis? Can we talk to them? Should we talk to them?
Yeah, I think so. Sometimes I might think about it and make up a conversation in my mind with spirit guides or with my spirit guide. And you get replies, but you think to yourself, oh, I'm just imagining it. But then mediums will say to you, no, that's sometimes how it comes. You've got to trust the information that's coming back to you. And so you can ask them for help and then see what comes up. It's very rare I would ask for help. But I've been through past life regressions where I've encountered my spirit guide. And one thing I find about them is they tend to have a great sense of humor. And when I encountered my spirit guide first time, they were some way off and they were coming towards me and they were dancing and they were walking like an Egyptian and doing the Macarena and all these sorts of things that was coming towards me. And I found also that they morph. They could be male and they're a good joker, and then they might just morph in front of my eyes into a woman, and she's really serious. And so if I see her show up, I'm like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble now. It's a thing where they sometimes take control of people as well when I'm in a session. And it's not like a bad thing. It's like people who are hypnotized are very relaxed and they tend to talk really quietly. And I've had a small number of sessions where suddenly their voice is very strong and they talk about themselves in the third person. And it sounds just like the spirit guide is talking about them. And I'm asking them all these questions, which I suppose is almost like some sort of channeling or something. So, yeah, I ask the question as well when we're in that space with them. I say to the client or the spirit guide, can you tell us how can we have a stronger connection to you? How can this person communicate? And they almost always say meditation. That's how to get a closer connection to their spirit guide.
And I don't think it's important to know male or female, know a name, know what they look like. It's just to trust. And there are so many moments, and I'm sure you've experienced them as well, that all of a sudden much time has passed and you think, how did that happen? You're kind of in a zone. And I think they work with us, whether we ask them or not. We've got these loved ones and friends that are by our side. And I love the sense of humor because I would think like minded souls hang out together. So yeah, if they're with
Yeah.
you and me, they have to be able to have a bit of a sense of humor. Simon, can I ask what people can find at your website, which is pastliveshypnosis.co.uk?
Yeah, I've got a page on there that's about the book and, a link to buy the book. They can go onto my booking page where my calendar is and book a free consultation, like a 20-minute Zoom call, free of charge. And we can talk about past life regression and what they might want to achieve during the session. And there's a lot of information on there about past life regression. And then there's links to my podcast as well, which is Our Paranormal Afterlife.
Which is wonderful because I'm left with, I want to hear more. I want to know about some of these guests. I want to read the book. Anything else you'd like to share with us with our time together?
I think that we're all on a spiritual path and that sometimes we get nudges and maybe we should keep our eyes open for little signs and things and not just write them off. Because I could tell you a little story about that that happened to me. I was interviewing a woman on my podcast who'd written a book about angels. And me as not being religious, never been religious, to me, angels is a religious thing. And they're, big white gowns and big feathers and wings. And she was saying, when they're around because they'll give you a feather or leave you a feather. And the next day I'm walking down the street and this white feather just drifts out of the air right in front of me. And so I'm thinking about what she said and I kind of wrote it off. And a few weeks later, I'm talking to a woman who's a medium. And we'd finished the recording of the episode. And I was talking to her and told her about this thing with the feather. And she's like, oh, yeah, yeah, pay attention to the feathers. If they show up, that's a sign. We finished the call and I went to see my teenage daughter in her room. And she's very, very tidy. Not like most teenagers, I imagine. And there in the middle of her empty floor was a feather. And it's like, well, where did that come from? And just as I'm talking to a medium about feathers showing up and it's a sign, a feather shows up. And I said to my daughter, where did that feather come from? And she looks down from her laptop and is like, oh, I don't know. And then goes back to what she's doing. So then months later, I visit a medium and we're sitting opposite each other in these big comfortable chairs and it's very clean. And she does this hour-long mediumship and she's really good. And we finished that, and then I said to her, "You know, I had this thing with feathers a couple of times." And I explained what was happening, and she said, "Look at the floor." And then in between us, there's a feather on the floor, and it wasn't there the whole hour she was doing the mediumship. Neither of us got up and went anywhere, and for me, it was quite a shock, and it's almost like, this does not compute. My brain came to a dead stop. That feather had to been teleported in or something. Because I just don't know where it came from. And again, it's the coincidence or the synchronicity that just when you're talking about feathers showing up in a weird way, a feather shows up in a weird way. It's too much of a coincidence. And so you feel like this is a sign. The spirit guides or the angels are trying to give me a sign, but then it's a sign of what? What are they trying to tell me? And I wonder if they did the first couple of feathers and they're getting frustrated and what do we have to do to get through to this guy? You know, finally they had to teleport one in some obvious place.
I love that. Well, they can teleport feathers, they can teleport business cards with Madison and
Mm.
Salon and all those kind of things. You just never know, and be open. And you mentioned meditation and our imagination and things. I don't know why, Simon, so many people think our imagination means we made something up. I think that's the access way that our loved ones come through in medium readings, and even messages from our guides can sound like our own voice, but just to trust that that's the communication center and to be open to it.
Yeah, yeah, and I think daydreaming as well. I think there's the point where you may be doing something that you do all the time. It might be having a shower, it might be cleaning the dishes, and you can do it on automatic, and your brain's just daydreaming and going off. And I feel like sometimes that can be an open channel to communication.
It can be like meditation with your eyes open, being in the zone,
Yeah.
being in the present moment. Well, Simon, thank you so much for being our guest today.
It's been great. I've really enjoyed talking to you. And I love telling these stories.
Ah, for our listener, just beneath the episode, there's a link so you can hear more about Simon on our previous episode. There's also a link should you care to check out his website, which is pastliveshypnosis.co.uk. And also this brand new book, yay, Verified Near Death Experiences, Proof of an Afterlife. There's so much. Oh, Simon, you are the best, just the best. And to our listener or our viewer, thank you for taking the time to be with us today. I know your time is precious, and whatever gave you the nudge to be with us today, I hope it's made a difference. Please don't forget my home base is wedon'tdie.com. So much going on. I think as human beings, we need to stay connected. It's so easy to get caught up in human life and our worries and fears and guilt and all that stuff, and time just goes by. But listen to a podcast, mine, Simon's, others, those that help you connect to the greater reality. Keep a good book by your bedside or an audio book on your phone, however you digest them. Come to our free Sunday gathering. It happens on Zoom, 2 o'clock New York time, every single Sunday. We just celebrated our 5th-year anniversary, which is great. But they're inspirational, they're motivational, they're non-denominational, and there's a medium demonstration within every one. So we get about 150 to 200 global people that join us. It's fun, and you never know if a loved one comes through, or you get to see just how close they are. So that's all at we don't die.com. In closing, my name is Sandra Champlain, always so happy to be your host on We Don't Die. I do believe that life is an education for the soul and that your life here on earth is important. So it might be great on the other side. And I know people with near death experiences don't often want to come back. We get to be there for a long, long time, but there's some real richness to be had here on earth. So reach out and give somebody a hug today or look at the mirror and just tell yourself you're fabulous. I'm one of a kind. My journey is unique and I can make a difference with another person because I am here. So I want to really thank you for listening or for watching, and we'll see you again soon.